Coming up, Will from Exploding Helicopter is on, and we're going to be looking at the original Roadhouse movie and the new Roadhouse, the Jake Gyllenhaal Roadhouse. So fun conversation there. So that'll be coming up in just a bit. And then next week, right, we get into the month of June, and Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time is back on as we continue his odyssey through the DTV films of Steven Seagal. We'll be looking at Pistol Whipped. So that'll be coming up next week. And then kind of speaking of Pistol Whipped, which was filmed in Connecticut, in 2 weeks, Ty from Comeuppance, who hails from Connecticut, he will be back on. We're going to look at two from Dermot Mulroney. So one of them is the Art Camacho film Ruthless, one that I think we've both been anticipating for a while. So we'll see just how much that film is without Ruth. We'll get a sense of it. And then also the other one is Lights Out, a Christian Sesma film that has Frank Grillo in it as well. So that'll be coming up in 2 weeks. And then the DTVC Extra podcast. Of course, we won't be doing one this week. I think I did say in the last podcast that I was going to do... I think I made a mistake. I was trying to say in 2 weeks, but I accidentally said this week. So no DTVC Extra this week, but next week we will be doing, starting with the Star Trek movie. So I'm going to look at the sort of the original 6, I think, of the original series 1. So Generations I might save for if I ever go back and do the Next Generation crew. So that'll be coming up in not this Thursday, but the Thursday after. Also, the previous one that we just uploaded, the John Wick one. So we looked at John Wick's 3 and 4, and then also did a bonus segment on Madam Web. There was an issue with how I saved the files. I don't know what I did there. I don't know what happened, but somehow I saved the first segment twice and then saved the Madam Web one, but labeled it John Wick 4. So I don't know how I did that, but somehow the original version of that podcast did not have the John Wick 4 segment in it. So I lost that one forever too, because I thought I had saved it. I hadn't. So when I closed out Odyssey and I was done with it, because I don't save the projects, they're so huge. Their files are so big that I don't save the projects. I just save the files that the Soundwave files, or I guess they're MP3 files. But anyway, I just saved those, so I had to re-record it, but I did re-record it yesterday, got that one uploaded. So if you're someone who's subscribed to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, those ones, and it automatically downloads, then you may have to remove that download and re-upload. Re-download. That's probably the way to do it. That way you get. So if you're listening to it and you notice there's something up where I go from John Wick 3 to Madam Web, as opposed to John Wick 3, John Wick 4, and then Madam Web, then you've got the bad version of it. So you can just remove that download and then re-download it, and you should be all set. Unfortunately that happened there. So I'm going to try to be a little more careful about how I record those. But we'll see what happens. But again, so I guess what is that going to be? It'll be the first one of June. June 6th is when we will be back with the DTVC Extra podcast. In terms of the site, we finally got back in order with the weapon. So we finally reviewed The Weapon. That was this past weekend. This coming weekend, looking to do Bulletproof. It is a movie that Vinnie Jones was in. So speaking of Will from Exploding Helicopter, who's on the podcast today, the Bulletproof is one we covered in a previous episode where we looked at 2 films from Vinnie Jones that Will was on. So you can always check that one out in the archives. But looking to get that review up this weekend. And then, I'm not sure from there because I have... Enemy Gold, Siddhar's film, listed as the next one up for review. I may still stick with that, but I've watched some other movies recently that I may mix in there. So always, keep an eye out there on that upcoming reviews watched space there. That gives you a sense on my Letterboxd page, I should say. Upcoming reviews watched on my Letterboxd page. That will give you a sense of what we've got in the hopper, what we're planning to do there. And so, if you're not following me on Letterboxd, definitely follow. I tend to follow back. So it's DTV Connoisseur, I believe is what we're called. So you can go in there and keep an eye on them. Not only the movies that I'm about to review, but movies I'm planning on watching for future reviews or podcast episodes. Also, I did I've got lists on there for I've got my Dolph Lundgren movie list. I've got, I think I've got a Gary Daniels, a Cynthia Rothrock, and Albert Pyun list. And then also I've cataloged the ones that Ty and I have done with his monthly visits on the show. That didn't sound good, his monthly visit, his monthly spot on the show that he does with us. I cataloged those movies so you can see kind of which ones we've covered and what episodes there's in. So Letterboxd has all kinds of stuff like that, so you can always go there and check that out. Finally, just to give you a sense of where I'm at on other people's podcasts, podcast. Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast recently posted episode that covered Forgotten. So I don't know if you know that Dolph movie, four, the number four, got the number 10. That's what, anyway, so he covered that one. I didn't do that one, but I did do Altitude. I discussed Altitude on that same episode with him. It was really, really fun conversation where we talked about kind of all the things that were wrong with that movie, some of the things that were fun about it. He had some insight from the filmmakers as well. So yeah, you can check that one out on I Must Break This podcast. So if you're not subscribed to that one, you definitely should be. And then this weekend, speaking of Will, who's on this episode here coming up, I was on his podcast to talk about Chuck Steele, Night of the Trampires, a stop animation send up to 80s action movies, which was a really, really fun conversation that I had with him. So he posts his podcast, I think, usually on the first of the month. So you can expect it, of course, first of the month, England time, or, I don't know, what would that be? Greenwich Mean Time? I don't know exactly what you call it, London time. But anyway, whatever the time is in London, that's when he usually posts his, that day on that. So sometimes for our East Coast time, we get it like late at night on there. But anyway, keep an eye out for that. I'm on that one as well. I think that's pretty much everything. It's already been 6 minutes, so might as well stop it here and get into the episode, because this is a really fun one here where we talk about the two roadhouses. So what we'll do is we'll stop here. We'll have John Cross from After Movie Diner and Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures play our classic theme song in here. And then once we get back after the theme song, we'll be on and we'll talk about the first Roadhouse movie. All right, we are back, and I'm joined once again by Will from Exploding Helicopter. Welcome back, Will.
Hello, Matt, and thanks for inviting me back on. Always a pleasure to guest on the DTV Connoisseur.
This will be an interesting one because we are going to be talking about a cult classic and then a remake of that cult classic here as we look at the 1989 and the 2024 Roadhouse movies.
Yes, I mean, how do you justify this, Matt?
Yes, it's going to be interesting. I mean, thinking of the first Roadhouse. I mean, when you hear whenever anybody mentions the first Roadhouse to you, like what are your thoughts, or what do you think of?
Well, I think of this film. I mean, I encountered this film as a teenager renting it on VHS, and so I remember loving it back then. So I have got long-standing fond memories of this film, and it's been interesting to see sort of over the years the development of you described it as a cult classic, and I think that's absolutely fair. And it's been interesting to see the sort of development of that cult status kind of develop over the years.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing because I don't know how it kind of became, a cult classic in the UK. I know here in America, it kind of started in the early 90s when Mystery Science Theater 3000 would make fun of it. And part of it was like that one of the guys on the show, Mike Nelson, he had this, what he joked was the Roadhouseian standard for an action movie. Essentially, if an action movie wasn't about a famous bouncer who battles corruption and finds love, he would give the action movie demerits for that, right? So that's the first thing was, and they had like, the Patrick Swayze Christmas song, which was just, essentially jokes about Roadhouse, like, I'll smash your kneecaps if you bastards touch my car. Like the lines like that in A Christmas Carol, which was really great. And then into the 90s, into the 2000s, as cable TV was taking off, you had Ted Turner with his broadcast empire with, CNN, TNT, and TBS. And you remember recently you posted a clip of To the Limit, the Anna Nicole Smith movie.
Yes.
And right, you remember it had the TNT watermark there. So TNT in the 90s showed a lot of that kind of thing. PM Entertainment flicks, Conquered New Horizons, low budget actioners, that kind of thing. And they wanted to kind of up their game a bit. So that's when they come up with the TNT New Classics. And I think part of it was Ted Turner bought out Warner Brothers, but he also just, had the rights to more stuff. So, on weekends you would just see like, Armageddon, Shawshank Redemption, movies like that would just be on all the time on the weekends. There's no more To the Limit, right? There's no more, Virtual Assassins, these kinds of movies that they used to show. They just, completely changed. But then
Mm.
Turner had another channel, TBS, that was like an local independent channel in Atlanta that he wanted to make it to another like national cable network, but he wanted it to stand apart from TNT. So we didn't want just to be another TNT. So then I was like, okay, so when he's coming up with movies, he started coming up with this when they're coming up with movies for that channel, it was like more of like a niche thing, and they had this concept of movies for guys who like movies, and they discovered with Roadhouse that if you aired Roadhouse during the day, it wouldn't do well for viewership. But if you aired it at midnight, it would be like it would kill its time slot. So that's what happens is they start airing Roadhouse at midnight and they center their entire movies for guys who like movies around Roadhouse. And it became a huge thing. And of course, when Patrick Swayze passed away in '09,
Mm.
Family Guy did a tribute episode to him where the main character in the cartoon, Peter Griffin, he finds Roadhouse and he decides that like the only way to solve problems is to roundhouse kick them. And so he just says Roadhouse and he roundhouse, so all these kind of things like develop, but it just becomes this big cult thing that like, I mean, there was a musical made about it, all kinds of stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know from the UK if it sort of tagged along from the US development of a cult classic or if it kind of happened organically on its own. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't offer much insight, but I mean, obviously, you mentioned I was unaware of the sort of plugging that it got on Mystery Science 3000, but obviously that does have a there are fans of that over here. I've never watched it myself, but it does have a fan base over here. So maybe that did play its part actually over in the UK and kind of seeding the sort of the popularity of this film.
Yeah, 'cause I remember my friends and I, there was like kind of like four Patrick Swayze movies, right? It was Red Dawn, uh, Dirty Dancing, this one, and Point Break, and they were all kind of their own things. But then this one sort of grew. I think part of it's because I personally, I don't know what you feel about Point Break, but I kind of think it's actually a good movie. I'm a fan of it. And Dirty Dancing, kind of the same thing. And then Red Dawn is Red Dawn, so I don't know, but this is more fun than Red Dawn, I think.
Definitely. I mean, and yeah. I mean, I was interested in what you were saying about Point Break. I mean, you actually think it's a good movie. I mean, does that mean you think that the popular consensus is that it's a bad movie or something?
I think it was. I feel like people are coming around on it a little bit more. I think maybe especially when the remake of that one was made and it was just so poorly received. I think people were like, it missed a lot of the things that the original did. But it does feel like people at least kind of group Point Break with Roadhouse. I don't know.
I think that. Well, I'm not sure. I mean, look, I'm just a guy, and my opinions are, my personal ones. But I feel like Point Break has definitely had a greater status for quite a considerable amount of time. I don't feel that its sort of status has changed. I think sort of definitely sort of through the mid 90s, like a lot of people I knew, was um loved that film, and then kind of I think those people then grow up and then become people writing about journalists and film critics themselves, and then I think they just kind of come of age, and then the sort of critical stock of a film changes. I think there was always a sort of an element of the appreciation of it being sort of uh, appreciation of it sort of perhaps acknowledging some sort of cartoonish aspects of it. But I think actually with sort of the longer Catherine Bigelow's career has gone on, I actually think that the status of Point Break has evolved with sort of Catherine Bigelow's sort of increasingly her longer filmography and the greater sort of critical acclaim that her films, things like The Hurt Locker, Detroit, have picked up. That I think that's then made people sort of revise their initial opinion of Point Break. But I don't feel that's necessarily a recent thing. I think that's something that's been true for maybe a decade. But I don't know. That's just my personal two penneth on the subject.
Yeah, you might be right on that because maybe in my head I'm thinking of people who probably haven't seen Point Break or just know the commercials with the 100% pure adrenaline, and Special Agent Johnny Utah who goes to college on a law school scholarship, which you might be able to do in the UK, but in America you can't because you go to you don't go to football scholarship for law school because you have to do your 4-year degree first before you can do law school. So yeah, anyways, there's like those goofy things, but yeah, I always had the sense that Bigelow was sort of like I don't know how to explain it. She was sort of playing with gender norms that come from action movies, where it was like this idea of her as a director and sort of the boys' club. She was kind of creating a concept of that in the movie that I thought came off really well. Where she was, with the male characters like Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves, where it was almost like you know she still finds them attractive and she still likes them, but they're also completely full of shit. And there's that part of it, that's clearly on display as well. Which is like Roadhouse doesn't have any of that kind of like you said, like irony in the cartoonishness.
Yeah, I think Bigelow's certainly. I think some of Bigelow's earlier films have. It's taken a passage of some years for people to actually appreciate some depths to them that perhaps people sort of overlooked initially at the time. So things like Blue Steel, there are like
Yeah.
interesting like gender dynamics going on within and commentary within that film. Things like Strange Days, that's definitely another film that has was kind of my sense was that was kind of like cult very quickly after it came out, but I think its stock has definitely risen since its release. So yeah, I think that because she was sort of playing in a genre toolbox, I think not some people, not necessarily all, overlooked some of the qualities that exist within those films.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, and I think yeah, the director of this movie, Roadhouse, Rowdy Harrington, he did not have that luck. He didn't have that advantage of anybody going back and looking at he
I'm not
didn't.
sure there are hidden depths in
No.
the filmography of Rowdy Harrington.
Exactly.
But
Well,
that's not to knock any of
no.
his films. I mean, he's done some very good films. Apart from Roadhouse. I mean, have you? I mean, I'm a big fan of Striking Distance.
Yes. Yeah, and I also like the Cuba Gooding Jr. Gladiator that he did
Oh,
with
terrific!
yes.
Yeah, Brian Dennehy with his great ducking his head down special move.
Right, exactly. The forehead. And it's almost like what's interesting is after Striking Distance, he just starts to make movies with James Spader. Which
Yes.
that's just he kind of falls into that, and that's just and they're kind of movies that tend to show up on free streamers like Murder of Crows and things like that.
I haven't seen the. I think Striking Distance is the latest Rowdy Harrington film I've seen. I mean, I'm intrigued. Have you seen
No,
Murder of Crows and what's that? I think it's Eyewitness or something. He's
Eyewitness.
done and
Yeah.
did another one with Spader. I can't remember the title.
The stick up
The
was the other.
Stick Up.
Yes, I opened up his filmography. Yeah, I haven't seen anything since Striking Distance either. So, yeah, it's interesting. He did those last. I mean, the last movie he did was in '04. It was I don't know if it was a documentary. It's about Bobby Jones, the golfer. So that's the last thing he did. But then the last feature movie would have been, or unless Bobby Jones is a feature, it could be. It's possible it wasn't a documentary. Oh yeah, because it's got Jim Caviezel, who everybody uh,
Passion of the Christ.
right, exactly, yeah. So oh, Claire Forlani, it's got all kinds of people in it, actually. Jeremy Northam. Wow, I didn't even know this movie existed, and it's got all these names in it. That's the last movie he made. So I guess Jim Caviezel plays Bobby Jones.
Okay. Well, I think we got our next collaboration sorted out. The Rowdy Harrington retrospective.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and it's interesting too because when you look at a movie like Roadhouse, right, you feel like it has to be directed by somebody named Rowdy. But the other movies he's done are not, movies that necessarily need to be directed by a Rowdy.
Yeah, I mean, it is it's a terrific name, and it's very appropriate. But he's like, I'm intrigued by Rowdy Harrington because he was just sort of, he was just like a sort of like lighting camera guy, and then suddenly he ends up being a director out of nowhere. Has this sort of brief period where he makes a whole some films with some big stars at the time, but it just feels like he was just catapulted sort of out of the behind the camera anonymity, made a director, works with some big stars like Bruce Willis in Striking Distance, The Spader, and then disappears again. I'm intrigued by his story. I am intrigued by his career. I'd love to know if I want the Rowdy Harrington documentary.
Right, exactly. Right. I'm curious, yeah, actually thinking about Striking Distance, I'm wondering if I'm correct on this, that it was, let's see, for producer. Oh, it actually doesn't have Joel Silver listed as producer. So I was wondering if that was the connection, is that Joel Silver kind of plucked him out as his director and said, okay, make some movies here. Because I think that's part of what we get with Roadhouse. Part of why Roadhouse becomes, and maybe that's the thing, right? Is that because the first Roadhouse has its Joel Silver kind of touches to it.
Oh yeah.
That's part of maybe why. Like, I wonder if Rowdy Harrington, if he had his druthers, if he would have made this movie a little bit understated. Which I don't know what that would have meant for this movie if it had become more understated.
Yeah, I think from some stuff I understand is that sort of Joel Silver was very instrumental in as he is in all of his productions. He was very instrumental in the tone of this film, and he was very much kind of like, let's you can't be too subtle with this film, like I think there's a line or something about his, like, you underline the obvious, which was his approach to kind of making this film. So I think that was, yeah, Rowdy Harrington, took his cues from Joel Silver and delivered a film that leaves no ambiguity in its production.
Exactly. Yes. Well, I'll do a quick synopsis. I don't know how much people need a synopsis for this, and then we'll kind of get stuck in on some of the things we like and don't like here about this Roadhouse movie. The plot is simple. Patrick Swayze plays Dalton, a famous cooler, which I guess cooler is the head bouncer. That's the term for head bouncer. And Kevin Teague from Emergency has a bar out in Missouri, and he calls in Dalton to clean the bar up because there's been a bad element there that's been causing issues there. Now, I guess I'm not sure. In the UK, did you get the TV show Emergency?
Not that I'm aware of, but who knows?
Yeah. So my wife was a big fan of the show. It's on reruns here. It was part of the same universe as Dragnet. So it was like Dragnet, Adam 12, and then Emergency comes after. It's like a spinoff of Adam 12. And Kevin Teague was one of two. So the whole concept of firemen being paramedics was a new thing in the 70s. And at the time, the idea was like, just get the patients to the hospital as soon as possible. Don't perform any kind of like care on them before you get them there. And that was the show, was that they were becoming. And so it was like, there was like a two-part thing where they would bring the people they would care for the people on site, and then they would take them to the hospital. And then there were doctors that were there that would do the doctor stuff and diagnose the problems and all of that. And so that was Kevin Teague. That's where Emergency was his big show. So yeah, so I guess, yeah, if you got even Dragnet probably would have been an interesting one in the UK, because it was like very, very political for, as far as like just pro LAPD and all that kind of stuff.
Love a bit of propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. So when Dalton arrives in Missouri, he discovers that the town is being terrorized by a crime boss played by the scenery-chewing Ben Gazzara. And he just revels in this baddie role here. And so this is it. Dalton's gotta, not only is he just going to be a bouncer cleaning up this bar, but now he's going to take on this horrible crime boss here. And hopefully he saves the day and saves Jasper, Missouri from the evil of Ben Gazzara. Yeah, well, I know you mentioned that you're a fan of this, or you enjoy this one, I guess I should say. Yeah, what are your thoughts on Roadhouse?
Oh, I enjoy this film, and I'm a unapologetic fan of this film. I mean, I think Roadhouse is a film where I feel like the filmmakers capture lightning in a bottle, because there are so many reasons why this film shouldn't work. Yet, through the magic of cinema, the alchemy of movie making, somehow this crazy idea for a film all comes together, and you just have like 2 hours of wildly, riotously entertaining action, romance, a little bit of comedy, some music as well. I mean, and some fight scenes. I mean, yeah, well, it just is. As I say, it's complete. It's complete nonsense, but it's just. I mean, it's just like so much fun, and it's unapologetic fun. Plays the material deadly straight, which I think is saving grace for this saving grace for this film. And yeah, I mean, I have loved this film ever since I was a teenager. I haven't actually before doing this podcast. I hadn't actually watched it in the longest time, and yeah, rewatched it, still love it. And I don't think, yeah, after over 35 years, I don't think my opinion of this film is ever going to change.
It's funny 'cause I think for my friends and I, we were not fans initially, and we kind of
Oh,
grew to like it as the '90s went on. Like, I think initially it was like, "What is this movie? What is he's a famous bouncer? Like, this isn't like And it was kind of like one of those things where we watched it and we're like, no, no, this is the I think as the '90s went on, we just loved it for the ridiculous. I mean, the monster truck. Why there's a monster truck, who knows? But it's there, and it serves its purpose because I think I want to say the scene where the monster truck drives through the car dealership, that was Joel Silver for sure. Like, he's like, I think they said in the trivia that that scene alone cost $500,000, which doesn't sound like a lot now, based on today's money, but yeah, a $500,000 set piece like that back then,
it's a
that
lot
would
of
have been,
money. But I mean, I
yeah.
think that speaks to the amount of actual sort of dedication and money that and craft that went into making a film this ridiculous. Because yeah, I think even there's a shot at the beginning of somebody getting out of the kind of the nightclub in New York where Patrick Swayze is working. There's a shot of a woman getting out of a car, and we see she's got like incredible legs. They basically like, okay, Joel said we need somebody with the best possible legs. So they hired some Italian model, flew her over from Italy. She was the person that if you were doing an advert for tights or something, any advert that kind of required sort of copious legs, she was the go-to woman to kind of like put in your advert because she had what was considered the world's best legs. She was Italian. They flew her over Italy just for that like few brief seconds of shot at the beginning of the film. I mean, that's the extent to which they went in order to make the best possible products. And I think I think that's why this film has lived on for nearly 40 years now.
Yeah, and I think even the themes that you have in this movie 35 years ago, like, going back to what you're talking about there, I mean, there's this huge juxtaposition of New York and Missouri, right? Because New York is always sort of like the big cosmopolitan city that, very few, if Americans, for the most part, if they go to New York, they're going there to go hang out at Times Square. I mean, I had to go recently for a work thing, but that's because I live so close, here in Philadelphia. But a juxtaposition, right? That here he is living this glamorous life, running a bar, or running this fancy nightclub in New York, and then Kevin Teague shows up and says, "Hey, I want you to come to Missouri and do this," and it's almost like part of his character, right? Dalton's character. That's almost like he doesn't belong even though he got his philosophy degree at NYU in New York City, so he spent enough time there apparently, but he's like, he wants to be in this house that has no TV on near the river with an old horse farmer owns, and just says lines like "pain don't hurt," which it's funny. Mike Nelson did a riff tracks. Mike Nelson from MST3K. He did a riff tracks of this when he first started doing riff tracks. And when that line comes in, "pain don't hurt," he says something along the lines of like, "Well, excuse me. By its very by its very definition, it has to hurt. Otherwise, it's not pain." But that's the kind of line that you get in this movie that I think again, it just adds to the charm.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's any number of phenomenal lines within this film. I mean, not to mention, I heard you had balls big enough to come in a dump truck. So,
Right? Right.
I mean, that's sadly we don't. I feel we don't get dialogue like that these days. Very much 80s dialogue.
Yes. Marshall Teague said that when he took his mom to see this movie when it was in the theater, and apparently the line, I used to fuck guys like you in prison, apparently like she stood up and pointed and said, that's my son. Which that's what celebrity can do for, you see your child on the big screen there, it doesn't matter, it's like, hey, just however you get there is how you get
Yeah.
there.
And yeah, you see when you see your son on the big screen boasting about male rape, you want to
Right.
stand up and applaud.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, even just the concept of the famous bouncers. I mean, I don't know how you felt when like we get towards the middle of the movie and Sam Elliott shows up, and it's like everybody knows him too. And
Mm.
like by the time he shows up and everybody's like, it's Wade Garrett. Oh my God, it's Wade Garrett. It's like there really are famous bouncers here. And this whole film universe was completely fine with the idea of these famous bouncers.
Well, I think that is, what you're mentioning there is kind of part of something which I think this film achieves brilliantly, and which sadly perhaps we'll get on to talking about the remake. It establishes a believable world. Well, it's not believable. It's not believable in the slightest, but it establishes a world that you buy into, and it is a world in where bouncers are like famous celebrities, where we're just random people in the street. Yeah, I've heard of that Wade Garrett guy, and obviously there are so many preposterous things go on within this film, yet it feels that they are taking the world in which they are taking place feels like, within the context of watching the film, feels believable, plausible. As
Right.
incredible as that, and as contradictory as that may sound, and that is part of the magic of this film. That's part of why it works, is that, yeah, ridiculous ideas like, yeah, celebrity bouncers, yeah, you sort of, whilst the film is going along, you'd kind of like, yeah, they would know who Wade Garrett is. Why wouldn't they know who Sam Elliott is in this film?
Exactly. It's funny because, one kind of interesting real life comp to this is I don't know anything about famous bouncers, but there was a famous dishwasher. I don't know if you've heard of Dishwasher Pete before.
I have not.
Okay, so Dishwasher Pete was this guy who I think in like the 70s and 80s, might have been just the 80s, right? But he had this idea that washing dishes was the last bastion of the migrant worker. So he essentially traveled the country just working at different dishwasher jobs. And he would just, come and go, leave, go to different places. He would sleep out of his car sometimes. And he started writing an underground zine based on his experiences. And that ended up, going into a book deal and all of that. But one of the interesting things that he talked about is, as a dishwasher, he felt like, okay, dishwashers are treated poorly, right? You're paid very little money. The restaurant is exploiting your labor to, for their own profit margins. So his mindset was, I'm not going to work any harder than I have to as a dishwasher. I'm going to, kind of work at a very slow pace or whatever. And he said that he would take on, when he would go to new jobs and they would find out who he was, that the people working with him were like, boy, I thought you were going to be faster, right? I thought you were going to be, like really good. And it just reminds me of this movie where everybody says, "Oh, I thought you were going to be taller." To Dalton, it's almost like the same idea.
Mm. You worked as a dishwasher, didn't you, Matt?
I did, and,
Do you
and
do you have do you have a statewide reputation?
no, no, I did that fortunately. But it was funny because at the time I was doing it, my boss, this was like in '09 was the last time I had a job, but it involved washing dishes. And my boss at the time was like, it's kind of a good thing. You get to kind of just take this job anywhere, can't you? And I was like, actually, you can't anymore because a lot of times those jobs are taken by either, people who just migrated to the United States. They're generally like someone like myself with a college degree, like they probably would be like, why do you want this job? Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing here? And they probably get a little nervous that I just showed up there, and all that kind of thing.
I mean, to
But
be honest, with a college degree, you're probably thinking the same thing yourself. But
right, exactly, exactly. Well, yeah, because in '09, what happened was I was in graduate school and I'd gotten ill. I had some problems with my blood pressure, and I fell behind on my graduate thesis. And my graduate thesis was on U.S. policy in Iran, like based on the Iraq War. And this was in '06 that I was writing this paper. And at that time, the war changed in Iraq, and suddenly it was like, oh, everything is pulling out of it was like everything had changed. My entire thesis went to crap. It was like essentially like my whole point of my thesis. But I was like, all right, I've just, that's when I started, writing my novel and started doing this blog here at the same time. And I was just like, you know what, I need some money, so I'm just gonna go grab this dishwashing job that was like in a retirement community, so I could get health benefits and things like that, which was kind of crazy. But it was like, okay, I'm just gonna just do this for right now. Excuse me. But yeah, it was a kind of a crazy thing where it was like there were people that were like, wow, people didn't know at first that I had a college degree. It was kind of one of those things that came after the fact. They're like, oh wow, you got a degree and you're doing this. I'm like, yeah, I just needed some money, and something I knew how to do. So it was like, so I kind of went for it. But I wasn't famous. I wasn't. Nobody else knew who I was.
That doesn't speak well for your dishwashing skills, Matt.
No, exactly. I was good at it, I guess. No, I don't know. Right, but not being good. I could have. That's the thing. I wrote my blog about direct-to-video movies. I should have written the blog about washing dishes, and that might have potentially made me famous.
In an alternate universe, Matt.
Right.
In an alternate universe.
Exactly. But I speaking of this universe, I think I saw something recently where Nicolas Cage was talking about making National Treasure, and he said that there's that scene in National Treasure where he's talking to his partner and says, "Hey, we've got to steal the Declaration of Independence." And he was saying how this is like the most ridiculous line, right, in a movie. Like, we're going to steal the Declaration of Independence. Like, what are we doing, right?
Mm.
But he's like, as an actor, you've got to sell it. You know what I mean? And I think that's what we get here with Patrick Swayze is that it goes into this and says, I'm playing a famous bouncer, right? But I'm all in, right? I mean, he sells it every time the director says action. He is selling this whole thing. And I think that,
Mm.
like you said, there's no tongue-in-cheek element to this. There's no irony going on. There's no wink, wink, nod, nod to the audience. This is he's fully focused and serious about being a famous bouncer. And I think that's like to your point, that's part of why this works so well.
Yeah, from what I understand, is a lot of the actors who are in this film, Patrick Swayze, Kelly Lynch, Sam Elliott, they were all looking at the script of this film. They all thought it was garbage, and they're like, what am I doing in this scene? Like, why would I say this? And apparently, like Rowdy Harrington and Joel Silver were just like, look, you just have to trust us. it'll it'll work on the screen. And yeah, kudos to those guys as actors, because they deliver the lines, and they clearly didn't necessarily believe in them at the time, but they deliver the lines, and it all somehow miraculously comes together. And I think the chemistry between like Patrick Swayze, Kelly Lynch, and Sam Elliott is really fantastic in this film. There's the scenes, especially the scenes where all of those three are together, like they're really good. They are really good, fun scenes. You kind of believe the relationships between them. They feel like I don't know. They feel like real moments just happening. However, you know if you kind of actually step back and think objectively about what's taking place in this, you're like, this is preposterous. But if you're just in the moment, those scenes are great. They absolutely work. You're following them. The characters feel real. They feel believable. And you're enjoying kind of observing them hanging out together. They're fantastic. And that's credit to the actors for kind of bringing it in those scenes, and making them work in the way that they do.
Yeah, it is. 'Cause I think that's the problem. I think a lot of times with movies today is that there would be so much of a wink, wink, nod, nod. That there would be like, oh, we're doing this ironically. I think one of the problems I have with the Asylum a lot of times is that they almost like try to insulate themselves by being ironic or being
Mm.
goofy. That like, oh, we're making a bad movie, but look at how goofy we are with this. Like the Sharknado movies, like that was like a kind of a big thing for them. And I think there is something about being earnest and just delivering the product in the most serious way possible, or just completely selling it the way that they did here, that I think is something that we don't get as much nowadays.
I completely agree, and I think you look at a lot of sort of films that have that kind of cult tag to them, which are made, maybe have actors who are not the greatest professionals, or people who are like not even professional actors. These films have them in, but these they are made the reason why those films still work is because they are made with sincerity, and however daft, stupid, or silly they may often be, the fact that the actors and the directors, the intent of them is perfectly serious, is what saves those films. And I think, yeah, I completely agree with you. Like, I get very, very frustrated. I mean, I don't want to go into this on a big tangent, but I get very frustrated with the asylum films for exactly that reason, for that nudge, nudge, wink, wink thing. You think of the first generation of those sorts of like creature feature films. Those people, the directors who were making those films, they were just trying to make the best possible film with the limited means they had available. And yeah, some of them do turn out to be like kind of looking back at them now, 40, 50, 60 years later, some of them do are kind of amusing at one level to watch them, but they stay, regardless of the daft special effects, they are much better to watch than the sort of the asylum stuff, because it is just, yeah, you just feel the kind of aspirations of those asylum films is not to make the best possible film with the means that we have. It's to sort of make something that is like passable. Like, is this good enough? Is the sort of like the highest aspiration for some of those films. But yeah, that's my little side rant at the asylum there. I'll end it there, lest we get too distracted.
No, but it is a really great point because I think for people looking at these kinds of movies, like whether it's for like you said these cult classics, I mean, I think there's a reason why, for example, like a Sharknado, right, doesn't come anywhere close to this kind of movie for a cult classic. Like it kind of caught lightning in a bottle, right? It was like this thing where everybody got a kick out of it on Twitter for a bit, and then they made like six more of them, and it was just like each one got progressively like people cared less and less about them. And I think it's because of that they're trying to sort of manufacture what this movie did organically just by like you said, like the actor saying like, "What is my motivation here?" And Rowdy Harrington, Joe Silver saying, "Just do it," and they just do their best job as actors, and they pull it off.
Yeah, and I going back to the sort of, I think they're making a film with love. I think
Yeah,
that's ultimately what it boils down to, and that kind of transmits itself through the screen. I think there are some people like operating in the that kind of asylum milieu who are who can still include like humor in those films, but it's from a place of love. They actually love these types of um, kind of genre movies. And who's the you might remember it's Dolph Lundgren, Don't Kill It. The director of that film
oh right.
did a big bug movie with it's got what's his name? Greg, is it Greg Gurenberg in? Oh god damn, blanking on the title of this film. It's got big spiders in it, big ass spider.
Right. Mike
That's
Mendez is the director, right?
Mike Mendez. Yeah,
Yeah.
Don't Kill It is actually I enjoyed watching that film.
Yes.
Big ass spider. I enjoyed watching that film. I mean, it's completely in that milieu, but it's very clear, and he's having some fun with the tropes and the plot dynamics. So there is a bit of element of humor there, but it's very clear he clearly loves the lineage of films that lie behind this. And so it actually is a enjoyable low budget, monster movie in a way in which so many of these other ones aren't. And I think it is, I say, I think it all boils down to like what's the motivating factor here, and it's like, yeah, it's a film made with love.
Yeah, exactly. Now,
If
now
that's not too wishy-washy to
no, but it is. It is. I mean, one of the things, and I think we're going to talk about this probably in the second movie when it comes to this concept of practical versus CGI effects. But in this movie, the fight scenes. One of the things that I found out. I don't know if you'd heard this as well, that Patrick Swayze was supposed to do Predator 2, but he injured his
Mm.
knee in the fight scenes that he was choreographing with Marshall Teague. So that's why he had to take Ghost. That's why he ends up doing Ghost instead of Predator 2, is because he needed a movie. He needed to do a movie that didn't involve any kind of physical activity because he was so beat up from this movie. He broke ribs in the scenes with Marshall Teague. So it's like even these fight scenes, like they went for it with this kind of stuff. They really, really cared about this, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and in terms of the fight scenes, apparently, like Patrick Swayze, was really struggling with the fight scenes because that's not he's not he doesn't have any sort of martial arts background, but he was I forget the name. They brought in some.
Oh, Benny the Jet or
Yeah,
Queens.
Benny.
Yeah.
Yeah, from Hong Kong to kind of like to choreograph the action, and he actually was like, okay, you're a dancer, and so they kind of like trained the choreography for the film using music to kind of because like Patrick Swayze, like you know, obviously a classically trained dancer like moving to music, so that was how he then sort of was able to kind of like learn the routines, learn the sequences and within this film. And yeah, I think that I mean they you just need to look at the list of stunt performers on this
Yeah.
film. I mean, it's like it's incredible. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'd need to. I haven't done a study in this, but I mean, I would have thought Roadhouse has got to be up there in terms of films with the most stunt performers. I mean, there's a formidable list of people who are performing stunts in this movie. So yeah, I mean, and you see that on the screen.
Yeah.
The bar fights are huge and epic. There's people getting, smashed over the head with bottles, people getting, thrown over tables, slid along the bar, like, it's complete, they're complete carnage, and it's like everything you could possibly want from, barroom brawl.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, one trope that this movie uses, and the one, I don't know if qualm is the right word. I don't know if quibble. I don't know exactly, I describe it, but the fact that Sam Elliott, and so this is spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen this movie, which I'm imagining everybody's seen it who's listening to this, but if you haven't, Sam Elliott's character dies. He gets killed by the baddies, and that seems to be a trope. I don't know if you've noticed this as well. A lot of action movies have this trope of whoever comes in, the old friend who helps the hero, is signing their death warrant the moment that they
Mm.
answer that call and show up to do that, or even if they don't, even if they're just in their apartment and the hero shows up and says, "I need to use your computer to look up stuff on the baddies," like they're gonna be dead soon. And it's one of those tropes that I'm not a big fan of. Like I don't know anybody who was watching this movie saying like if they hadn't killed off Sam Elliott's character, would have been watching it like, man, I don't know if I could have get my I would have liked this movie, but they didn't kill off Sam Elliott. I wish they'd killed him off. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I completely agree with you with the fact that it is a huge trope, and I was recently rewatching Sea of Love, the Al Pacino serial killer movie, and John Goodman is teamed up with Al Pacino in that film, and they have a kind of great relationship, and it's like by all conventions of like these sorts of films, John Goodman's character should die, should be killed by the serial killer in order to kind of send Al Pacino over the edge in that film. Yet John Goodman kind of like gets all the way through to the end of that movie, and I was when I was rewatching that film, I was like, my abiding thing was like, how does John Goodman survive to the end of this film? I mean, like he's like just sort of as soon as he kind of comes into the film and the film starts taking shape, you're like, oh yeah, he's toast. He's
Right.
gone. He's going to be dead at the end of the second act, which is then going to kind of like set up sort of Al Pacino shifting through the gears to kind of finally get the serial killer. But that's that doesn't happen. So I was a bit miffed actually when we didn't get what I was expecting to be the kind of time honored trope of the kind of best buddy getting bumped off by the villain of the piece.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because they use that trope, and of course they use it, right? That's the motivation, right? That Patrick Swayze, Dalton is ready to get out of town. He's like, okay, let Ben Gazzara have his Missouri. Part of the reason, really, the reason why he decides to let Ben Gazzara have the town is that Kelly Lynch, right, as the doctor, she has witnessed him rip out Marshall Teague's throat. And I
Mm.
would imagine there's a certain probably subset of women who would find that attractive or a turn on, but for the most part, right, that's one of those like
It's a
red
bit
flags.
of a passion killer, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah,
I
it's
would
like
say.
right, exactly. Especially if you're a doctor, you probably don't want to see that. So really, she's just like, he because he goes to the hospital thinking he's going to save her, and she's like, get away from me. I don't want you around. And he's like, okay, you know what? I don't have a girlfriend anymore. F this town. Fuck this town. I'm done. I'm gonna get out. And when he gets to the bar and sees Sam Elliott lying there, and suddenly there's a knife in him that says it was Tails, which is one of my friends. That's one of his favorite scenes in the movie. It's just that like that drama, right? And it is a great scene, right? Because it's like the knife is there with the it was Tails, and right. Like so just give people an idea. The knife is through a piece of paper that says it was Tails, because the idea was that Ben Gazzara had the coin flip, right? And it was like
Mm.
heads Kelly Lynch dies, tails Sam Elliott dies, and so Patrick Swayze got it wrong, and there's like blood dripping down, and it gets on his tattoo that says Rose that's on his arm. You see the blood kind of spilling through, and then Patrick Swayze has one of those like dysfunctionally masculine cries where he's like trying to fight back the tears, but he can't. And he's kind of sitting there with like his like the grimace face with the like kind of that kind of thing, and then then the anger starts to well up in him, and he's like, okay, I'm going for these guys now. And so, at least on that part of it, it works, right? It
Yeah.
works in kind of the same ridiculous way that so much of the movie works.
I mean, do you think Sam Elliott has ever been cooler than he is in this film? I mean, I often, whenever I watch this film and I see Sam Elliott in it, I just feel like Jeff Bridges has essentially sort of borrowed Sam Elliott's persona from this film for so much of what he's done in recent years.
I mean, you could say he took it to an Oscar, right? In Crazy Horse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. He's crafted quite a career based off Wade Garrett, based off Sam Elliott's Wade Garrett, to the point that he got an Oscar for it, which is it. And I saw Crazy Horse, and I think he deserved the Oscar. I think he was that good in it. But you're right. I don't know that you could ever think of anything like that. That you could take a character off of Roadhouse, base your whole acting ethos off a Roadhouse character, and win it the acting's highest honor for it.
Yeah, I think yeah, the Academy needs to take a long, hard look at itself and think about just what they have done.
Yes, right. Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I was trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, there's a few actors in this that we see, kind of in our low budget movies. I mean, Gary Hudson. I'm sure. I think you've
Oh
done
yeah,
Bridge of Dragons on your podcast. I'm not sure.
I have done Bridge of Dragons and Gary Hudson. I think he was in some of the Operation Delta Force movies. I think I
Yes.
can't remember which ones. There's so many of them. There's like at least five.
Yeah.
He was in some of them. So yeah, he was a Keith David
Oh, yes. Yes. Keith David's in this. Yeah.
turns
Which
up briefly.
he had more scenes apparently, and they had to
Yes.
cut them. So, which I would like to see more Keith David, but if it's keeping the film under 2 hours, sorry Keith David, but I think he'll agree. That
Can we talk though? I want to give a special mention to like because I don't know what you think, Matt. I don't think Kelly Lynch is like the hottest woman in this film. I actually think Kathleen Wilhoit is, I have a much bigger crush on her in this film than I do on Kelly Lynch. I
yeah,
mean, I mean, I have a soft spot for her for Murphy's Law,
same.
the like where she's just constantly insulting Charles Bronson for 90 minutes.
Right.
Dildo nose,
Yes,
butt crust.
you're right. I think I was saying to Chris of Bulletproof Action that's when my friends and I learned the term butt crust was in that movie.
I mean, I love her character in this movie. Like anytime there's a fight, she's down there front and center, kind of like
Mhm.
urging on like Patrick Swayze, which is yeah. She loves she'd probably be I mean she'd probably be very bored working at the kind of new and improved Double Deuce when there's just sort of no mass brawls breaking out every 5 seconds.
I wonder when we get into that movie, it'd be interesting to see if maybe the decision of actress to play that role, maybe, like I wonder if more people said what we were saying here about Catherine Wilhoit. I mean, because you're right. Not only is she some, more like, like I kind of felt the same way. Like I liked her character, and I was more had more of a crush on her for sure than Kelly Lynch. The other thing is that, like, she sings, and apparently they discovered this during the shooting, was that, oh, Catherine Wilhoit
Ah,
is actually a singer. And so Rowdy Harrington, I think it was Rowdy Harrington's idea, or maybe it was Joel Silver, somebody's idea,
yeah.
that, like, oh, if we have her sing, right, if we do a scene where she's singing, and
Yep.
they do a cover of Knock on Wood, that it would show that the entire bar is developing as Dalton is turning things around. That,
Mm.
like, all of these people are becoming, are growing as humans, due to his influence. And to that extent, actually, it works in that way, right? Like, you feel like, oh, she's kind of coming into herself more, that she's singing, which I think that's a really great scene.
I completely agree. I think the relationships between the characters, and obviously we're going to be talking about the remake soon, but I think the relationships between the characters in this film are just work so much better in this version than they do in the remake. And I think the actors that they have in these, like, as these side characters, are just much better. They're much better cast. And I'm not sure how, if they're much better written, but they're certainly much better cast. And they're memorable in a way in which, I'll try not to get into the next one before we get there, but they're memorable in a way in which they are completely unmemorable in the remake. And yeah, that's a tribute to Rowdy Harrington, tribute to the actors that they pulled in to play these parts. Because yeah, I completely agree that you feel that community around the bar, and you feel like the dynamic, and that's the whole thing of, like, the bar at the beginning, like, the Double Deuce is an absolute dump at the beginning
Right.
of this film. And you can see the clientele is just, you can see they're just all trash, and they are there just to fight, you can see. And then uh, yeah, in the remake, I'm like, okay, like, why is anyone going to this? I'm unclear in the remake why anyone is going to that bar, because it looks like a somewhere, you're a married man. You'd never get your wife to come with you to that bar. Like,
No,
like
I mean, the
'cause
only way we would go to that bar is if we just happened to be in that area,
yeah, and you had
and
no knowledge that it was a
no knowledge, and
hellhole.
we're just like, oh, okay, let's just go check this place out. And then, but the thing is, nowadays, right, this is 2024. My wife would have been on her phone being like, okay,
Hmm.
because, one, my wife is gluten free, so she would have had to make sure they had something gluten free on the menu. She would have looked at it and said, this place has horrible reviews. We're not going here. We would have just, ordered it or something like that, for sure.
Exactly. And you see in the Swayze version of Roadhouse, you see the clientele change
Right.
as authority is asserted in the bar, and so they get a better class of people in there. And it makes sense. And as I say, you see the relationships, you see the kind of the bounce. Swayze weeds out the kind of the complete ne'er-do-wells who are on the staff of this bar. He realizes the people who are actually sort of have a bit of integrity, and that he can work with. And you see them kind of over the course of the film knit together into a unit. And it's such a small. It's kind of like ultimately it's an insignificant thing, but it's the small details that I think that Roadhouse actually takes care of the small details, and that's why it ultimately works in a way in which the remake, spoiler, I don't think works at all.
Yeah. I think, to your point, there's a couple things, I think, to your point, that I never really would have thought of if I didn't have the new one to compare it to. But, like, for example, Travis McKenna plays Jack, kind of the bigger bouncer guy, who he was kind of a doughy kind of
Mm,
character actor, but he stands out, right? Like, when you see him on the screen, you know who he is. You know what his role is. He's sort of developing as a bouncer, learning from Dalton, and it's kind of important, right, that they have someone who kind of stands out like that. Or Jeff Healey as the blind, musician, who apparently the role the character created was based off of Jeff Healey, because he had that big hit at that time, Angel Eyes. And they based the character off that and discovered they could actually get him to play the part. And it was like,
Ah.
yeah. So they actually the whole concept was based off of him, and it was like, yeah, well, why don't we just get him? So he. But like he plays throughout the, he also kind of, and we get the sense that he's a transient sort of musician who has found his place now at the, at this bar, and he's like performing. And also interesting too, like it seems like the songs, I don't know about you, but it seems like the songs add like tone to the film, right? Like they're sort of like for example, the Catherine Wilhoit song when they're doing Knock on Wood, it's almost like this, like, oh, everything is nice and good here kind of thing, and then it's like he's doing like what was all along the Watchtower, right? When things start to get a
Mm.
little bit dicier there, it kind of added to the movie, which it's like you said, it's like a touch that the new movie, in trying to go in a different direction, misses the touch that something like that can have.
Absolutely, and I just it's, as I say, it's the small details which kind of don't really seem that big a deal, but then when you watch the remake, you begin to realize just how important it is to take care of that stuff, and it's what gives the film bit of believability, or allow it's what gives the film, or what gives you that ability to suspend your disbelief, and which, yeah, you kind of end up struggling to do a bit, in the remake.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and I think as we wrap up here, I think that's a really great point about what you say, because we think of having to suspend belief or believe the universe when we think of like sci-fi or horror or something like that, right? That like, okay, I'm watching a Marvel movie, and I've got to believe that this man can put on an iron suit and fly around and blast things, right? Like Robert Downey Jr. and everybody else needs to make me believe that. We don't think about it so much with a movie like Roadhouse, that like you've got to believe that there's a world where there's famous bouncers. But you kind of do, even if you ultimately, like you said, ultimately feel like this is a completely daft concept, right? To enjoy it, you've got to believe it while you're watching it. And that's the one thing I think that this movie does, from the actors to the shooting, to, like you said, like the little touches. It at least accomplishes that.
I completely agree. Whilst you're watching it, you believe what what you're watching. Obviously, when you stop watching it and you sort of thinking about it the next day, you're like, hang on a minute, this is like, what the? But in the moment, the skill of the filmmaking is such that you believe it in the moment, and you can just get on with enjoying it, and it is, that kind of, we hail directors and filmmakers for for all sorts of things, for some, elaborately constructed, continuous one shot take, or for, for some, exquisitely, lensed, deep focus photography or something. But you know we overlook the skill that it takes to make a film where, yeah, bouncers are, America's biggest celebrities.
Right, exactly. Well, before we take a break and head and move into the second, or the new Roadhouse film, anything else about this movie that we didn't mention that you wanted to bring up?
I think I would just like to very quickly mention the score for this film, which
Yeah.
is by Michael Kamen, and it is the most. I don't know what you thought, Matt. It's the most Michael Kamen score, I think. I mean, he did Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, Renegades, all around this time, and all of his scores for those films have this. Kind of feel like this, like they're all tracks off the same album, and it was, yeah, I enjoyed my time with the score in this film, because, yeah, it's unmistakably Michael Kamen, and yeah, sounds a bit like Die Hard, sounds a bit like Lethal Weapon, sounds a bit like Renegades. It was all good though.
You make a great point, because like, I forgot to mention that. Like talking about taking the movie seriously, right? Taking what's happening seriously. I mean, in that end fight scene, that fight scene between Dalton and Marshall Teague's character, like the ramp up orchestral, tension building, orchestral music there, where it's like doom 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 doom, so like punching each other and stuff like that. it adds a level to it, like you said, that like an electric guitar or something like that just would not have hit the same way that this does.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I love the scores to all of those films. I love the score to this film. And it definitely makes it's part of what makes this film work is the score in those moments that just adds that little bit into scenes which because I mean I don't ultimately I think the kind of the ending of this film is a little bit of a damp squib maybe,
Yeah.
but I think you kind of had too much fun along the way to really knock it. So
Yeah. Well, because the problem is, right, is that when you have a villain like Ben Gazzara, um, no, even though he was a Korean War vet, right?
yeah,
There's really nothing that we're not gonna buy that Ben Gazzara is gonna be able to take out Dalton, whereas we can buy that Marshall Teague, right, could potentially take out Dalton. So that's one of the problems, right, with the way the movie is constructed, is that by having this head baddie and then his henchman, the henchman's the real fight, right? You've got to figure out a
yes,
way to, and I guess one of the tropes that they didn't go in on, which I think I kind of appreciated, was the damsel in distress trope. But that's usually right how the weaker baddie, physically weaker baddie,
mm.
that's how he evens the odds, right? It's like, well, if you come for me, I'm going to shoot your girl, and they didn't, at least they didn't do that. But you're right, because they didn't do that, I think it almost kind of like it almost kind of made the ending a little bit, like you said, a little bit of a damp squib.
Yeah. I mean, they do ultimately have something that is of interest at that end, which is obviously you have the other townsfolk
Yeah.
stepping in finally in order to confront Ben Gazzara, which actually avoids the need for Patrick Swayze to kind of dispatch Ben Gazzara, which is just kind of always feels like an uneven contest. So that was actually an interesting choice. But a lot of what happens prior to that is, I mean, we get that great PM inspired car flip.
Yeah.
Um, but then the stalking around the house is kind of a bit underwhelming. Um, I enjoyed that bloke getting kind of stuck under the polar bear. That was quite
Yes.
fun. Um, you know, hey, there's too many pluses in the positives column for me though to really complain about the ending here.
Yeah, I agree completely. I agree for sure. So, yes, what we'll do here, we're going to take a break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the new one. We'll get a little stuck in on this new one. So, we'll be right back. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former special forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle. All right, we are back, and now we're going to get stuck in on this new Roadhouse movie. So, Will, when you heard that they were making this Roadhouse, what were your thoughts?
Um, I thought it was a bad idea, because, as I said about the first film, I felt that film really captured lightning in a bottle, and I just felt that how are you how are you possibly going to make this work because I feel like that in some ways the first film was a bit of, frankly, a bit of a fluke. Um, I mean, I'm not one of these people that is against any kind of remake. I'm very agnostic when it comes to remakes. I mean, if you're familiar with the history of Hollywood, I mean, they've been remaking films ever since they started making movies, and like the Maltese Falcon, I think that's like the third or fourth version of that particular book that Hollywood made. When I say the Maltese Falcon, I mean obviously the Humphrey Bogart version.
Yeah.
So that was like the third or fourth version of that particular story that they'd made. So if you're going to kind of knock, if you're going to knock remakes, then and say, oh, they should never remake anything, well, then you know you have to knock that film out of existence and out of film history, which I don't think that would be doing anybody a favor. So I'm fairly not agnostic when it frankly comes to remakes. Although I did think they were probably on a hiding to nothing with this. So yeah, I wasn't terribly optimistic for it, and when I watched the final version of it, my lack of excitement for it was confirmed, I'm afraid to say.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there was a part of me that's like, I wasn't going to do this at all. And then I know some of the other podcasts were doing it. Bulletproof, they did kind of something similar to this, but they did like two separate episodes. They did the old one and the new one. And then the guys at DTV Digest covered this. And when I was, reaching out to you about doing an episode and brought this up as a possibility, you were into it. I was like, okay, this might be the way to approach it, is to kind of do them both in one episode. But I've never seen the DTV sequel to Roadhouse either. I don't know if you've seen that one with Richard Norton.
I have, although I don't remember it in particular. Don't remember it in great detail. The only thing I remember about it was I think that was my first experience of Jake Busey, and so I was like well into sort of how much he sounded like his dad.
Right.
So that was yeah. Jake Busey is the sort of the only memorable element of Roadhouse 2. Was it Last Orders or something? That's
Last
something.
Call, I think.
Last
Yeah,
Call, yeah.
yes, yeah. So to give you a sense of how I was introduced, and I think how most of America was introduced to Jake Busey, was a TV show here called Shasta McNasty, which whenever you looked in
Sounds
the TV
great.
guide, yeah, oh, it was consistently listed as one of the worst television shows in America, and I don't know how it lasted as long as it did, but it was always like when they would list like the TV ratings for the week, it was always at the bottom of the list. It was yeah, so that was that was how I remember first hearing about him, was through that. So yeah, it's interesting because that's kind of how you would, like you said, Hollywood's been doing remakes for as long as there's been a Hollywood, and so you've got so many movies that have been remade. I mean, I think of in the '80s. I mean, I remember Godard's Breathless was remade with um,
Richard
Richard
Gere?
Gere,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and it's like, why are you doing? In the I mean, if you're gonna give this movie a hard time, it's like, I mean, Breathless is Breathless, right? Like, it's like, who's trying to because it's not like Godard. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Godard, but I'm not trying to say like he's the end all be all as director. But he has a very unique take on directing that, like, you can't just remake one of his movies, right? Like, it's just, but they tried to remake one of those. So if they can remake Breathless, I think, Roadhouse is maybe fair game still.
Absolutely. As I say, I'm completely it. And if it was successful, I think you just need, if any film was successful, you just need to accept they're going to remake it at some point. And very often, even if a film isn't successful, they're possibly going to they're going to remake it anyway. So I think you just need to just let the starch out of your collar, take the broomstick out your backside, and just relax into the fact that you may love it, they're going to remake it anyway.
Right, exactly. And I mean, this remake had been on the table earlier. So I think in 2016 they had planned on a remake with Ronda Rousey as the lead
Yes.
character. I think at that point her star had started to fall. I think she was in the Expendables 3, I think it was 2014, and I think
Hmm.
that movie overall wasn't received as well. But I think there was also a sense that she wasn't quite there, as like she didn't have like that it factor to be like this next female action star, and I think that was part of maybe why that movie started to get scrapped around that time.
Yeah, and I don't really remember. I'm not terribly au fait with Ronda Rousey's sort of career and so forth, but I have a sense in my mind that that didn't she also then start to sort of actually sort of start losing
Yeah.
like her fights, and so that then kind of I felt my recollection is that also then sort of damaged her cachet as sort of an action lead. If sort of like, yeah, professionally they're on a massive losing streak and they're getting beaten up on a regular basis.
Yeah, that didn't help. I think she just, her I think she'd had some issues sort of in the media and things like that as well. It was like a few things that were happening at once that kind of, yeah, led to, I think she was working as a wrestler in the WWE. I think she was there for a little bit. I don't know if she's still doing that, but yeah, I mean, you think of like the 2010s. I mean, when Stallone casts her in Expendables 3, I think for me watching that movie, I was like, I just want the regular Expendables. I don't need these kids, in here. But it was like, oh, of course you're gonna have Ronda Rousey. Gina Carano, I guess, was the other one, right? That they were looking. They thought they had it with her, and then she just decided that she was going to compare COVID restrictions to being Nazis and those kinds of things, and Disney had to drop her. Which, I think one of my tips out there for anybody who's an aspiring actor. Just don't mention Nazis at all unless you're talking about a historical context of like, I'm going to be playing a Nazi in this movie about World War II. Just avoid mentioning that on Twitter, and you're going to do okay for your career, I think.
A mate of mine, a good friend of mine, we have a running joke, which is there's something. Well, UK politicians are very. There's a good number of UK politicians like to mention the Nazis or make comparisons to World War II, and it always ends badly. And like we have a running sort of like it's like just like a bit like the Fawlty Tower sketch. It's like, don't mention the war. That is the key thing for a successful political career. And it's like, just whatever the temptation is, do not make comparisons to the Second World War, because it always ends badly. Like, always, just don't do it.
Yeah, I had heard so my wife and I watched this reality show, Real Housewives of New Jersey, and one character made an analogy to Hitler. I think she essentially said like, I can't remember exactly how she used it, but there was the character that she used the analogy to was Jewish, and accused her of being anti-Semitic. But that character's or that actual character, they're actual people at reality show, but her father, who had survived the Holocaust, or yeah, I don't know if he'd actually made he escaped. He was kind of escaped out of Europe from Belgium. But he said, the rule is you only talk about Hitler if you're talking about a historical context, right? Like I am talking
Mm,
about when Hitler ruled, whatever. That's the rule. And I think when you're on a social media platform, that's a good rule to follow. It just say, like there's no sense, and Gina Carano, she's now doing movies for the Daily Wire or something like that. When she was like Disney Plus, you know what I mean? She was like there, she was going to be making the big movies. If anybody looks at that situation and thinks she was railroaded, just remember the rule. That's like you said, the politicians in the UK again. Remember the rule because it's an easy enough rule, I think. But yeah, that's probably why we don't have Gina Carano in this role as opposed to Jake Gyllenhaal.
yep, I completely agree. I mean, she's uh, completely blew up her own career, and she frankly only has herself to blame for it.
Yeah, because she, I think more than Ronda Rousey, she had the it factor. When you watch some of those, you see her on The Mandalorian, you see her in some of the movies that she did. She kind of had it more. And I think that was a plan that they had, was that they wanted to do a gender swap for the main character, because that at least would have been something unique.
Mm,
In the remake, it would have
yep.
been like, we're doing something different with this character, which I don't know how you feel about that, but I kind of would have liked that more, to have done something unique with it.
Yeah, I mean, if you are going to do, as I say, I've long accepted that we're going to get remakes of stuff, but if we are going to get remakes, I do prefer it if somebody has got a fresh spin on it, and whether that's like gender swapping it, or I don't know, whatever the kind of like the fresh take on the material is. Like I much prefer it if somebody's got like a new idea for kind of how to handle the material. So yeah, if they had done a gender swap version of Roadhouse, I would have been much more excited for it, than if when they sort of announced, yeah, we're doing it and it's going to be with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, because you know it actually makes more sense too as a famous bouncer thing, right? Because you actually could be, if you were a woman, as a, a woman head bouncer or cooler or whatever, that actually would be more likely to be famous, right? Like they
Yeah.
could get featured in an article or something like that and become famous. That actually would have been which I guess as we get stuck in on this, and I kind of do a quick synopsis of the plot here. There are no famous bouncers in this movie, which I feel like that was kind of the biggest piece about what made Roadhouse was that you had famous bouncers.
Yes, I mean, in some ways, I appreciated them trying to um, kind of okay. Let's. Why would Jake Gyllenhaal be famous? So actually, let's make him a MMA fighter who's become notorious because he's involved in you know killing somebody in in a ring. So I actually in some ways I kind of thought that was a clever solution to that particular issue. But um, you know, yeah, there's so many other problems with this film that.
Yes. Well, I'll do a quick synopsis. So the basic idea of this is that Jake Gyllenhaal is this disgraced UFC fighter who's sort of traveling the country, like getting into underground fights where usually the other opponent doesn't want to fight him because they know who he is, and once they realize that, they just walk away and he gets the money. But we have Jessica Williams who owns a bar in the fictitious Glass Key in the Florida Keys, and she's looking for a bouncer to clean up the bar. And she's originally going to get Post Malone, pop singer, rapper, etc., which tells you what movie this is. When you see Post Malone in this movie, you know this is where we're going. This is the kind of movie we got here. It's kind of like with John Wick 2 when they have Common in it. I'm like, okay, this series has changed, right? It's moved into a different echelon or different kind of thing. Post Malone. I don't know if you are familiar with Post Malone.
I'm not familiar with him, so I was very intrigued as to quite why that signaled so much to you.
Well, so he's a pop singer for generally younger millennials are fans of his, but he I only know of him. I only know of his music because he did a series of ads for Jägermeister, and Jägermeister is one of the major sponsors of the National Hockey League here in America. So if I'm watching hockey games, his commercials would be on. So that's how I kind of know him. I mean, he's supposed to be like a really nice guy. He's supposed to be like like I think that's why his fans love his music so much is that he's actually really nice. But when you see him there with all his tattoos and stuff, because he's got those tattoos in real life. That's how he looks. Okay, we've got a a pop singer that people born in sort of like the mid 90s are more of a fan of. Okay, where's the audience for this movie? Like, okay, this is the Gen Xers are probably or older millennial or whatever. This isn't necessarily your movie. I guess
Hmm.
that was the sense that I
Oh,
got. And
okay.
yeah, and so anyway, so when Jessica Williams wants him to be her bouncer, but when he runs away from his fight with Jake Gyllenhaal, she offers the job to him. And after some soul searching, where he has a suicide attempt that he decides to abandon last minute and luckily survives, he decides I'm going to go down to Florida and take this job. And he seems to take really well to being a bouncer, despite having no experience with it at all. Um, but of course, things aren't always what they seem, and it turns out he was brought here under dubious circumstances. Jessica Williams neglects to tell him that an organized crime family in the town, run by the extremely millennial baddie Billy Magnuson, playing the character of Ben Brandt. I was surprised he wasn't a crypto bro. He was that was the kind of baddie that he was oozing there. But they're trying to take over her bar. Named Roadhouse. They're trying to take it over because they want to build a resort on the water there because it is very nice waterfront property. And so, Mr. Dalton here, Jake Gyllenhaal, his character's name's Elward Dalton. He's got a decision to make. Do I want to stick around and fight off these baddies, or do I want to hit the road? And just like they did in the first Roadhouse, the baddies give him a reason to stick around. When he was about to get on the Greyhound, they decide we're going to blow up a friend's business,
Hmm.
similar to what happens to Red's car dealership, and he sticks around and he fights it out. And of course, we have Conor McGregor as kind of the Marshall Teague role, kind of in that vein
Yeah.
there. Yeah, very aggressively nude in a good chunk of the film, and so that's our movie there. So yeah, I guess Will, what are your thoughts on this movie?
Oh, well, I think when I've been on your podcast before, I've mentioned my sort of three strikes rule,
Yeah.
where I can, like most films, no film is perfect,
Right.
and that it's always going to have flaws. And if I'm enjoying the film overall, I can overlook a certain amount of flaws. But there does come like a point where things reach a critical mass, and you just like, okay, this is too much. I can't suspend my disbelief anymore. This you're asking too much of me of an audience, and I'm afraid Roadhouse is definitely a victim of that sort of three strikes policy. I mean, it's there are more than three strikes against this film. I mean, it just nothing terribly works. I mean, like on a positive level, I actually think Jake Gyllenhaal is pretty good in this film. I actually think that how he plays the character is actually okay. He has this sort of ironic detachment, which I think basically works. But unfortunately, there's just too much bad around him. And it can kind of, I say, I'm going to list a whole bunch of stuff here, and it kind of feels like, oh, just like nitpicking. But as I say, it goes to this point of like there are just too many strikes against this film, and it also speaks to going back to the original Roadhouse, and what we were talking about is like taking care of the small details. So you know for instance, like let's talk about, there's absolutely zero chemistry between Jake Gyllenhaal and Daniela Melchior, who's the kind of love interest in this film. There is just no chemistry there within that film. Um, I don't think the I think Billy Magnussen he's kind of got that, he kind of works as the main villain, but I think there are some, I think he's good enough as an actor to pull off that role, but I think there are some issues with him as a villain that don't work. I think that there's a whole idea of Joaquin de Almeida as this kind of corrupt sheriff, kind of it's sort of like half written, that idea of him as the corrupt sheriff, and he's involved in it. um there are then issues around how this film is shot. So I don't know what you thought. I thought that Miami looked really quite chilly. There's this sort of like cool look to the color of this film, and it just made for a film that takes place outside. People are in the water. This bar, that the Roadhouse bar in this is something that is, there's no glass. It's just completely open to the elements, but yet it just looks, everyone, I can imagine sort of when the director called like cut on a scene, everyone was like, okay, like reaching for a coat or reaching for a blanket. Like everybody looks cold in this movie. It needs that sort of Michael Bay, like Bad Boys type color saturation to make this film feel like it is hot. And then there's weird stuff going on with the sound dialogue in this film, with the kind of the dialogue of this film, how it's recorded. And there's this jerky camera work for the fight choreography or for the fight scenes, which um, like was a deliberate choice by Doug Liman because of, we can talk about that in more detail. It's like how he chose to stage these fights. Ultimately, though, I don't think that works, and it's just problem, and there's just too many of them to overlook. And so overall, this film, it doesn't create that, doesn't establish a world. The characters are just not that interesting. It's just yeah, it's like movie porridge. It's kind of it's just bland
So
ballast.
now I completely agree with you about Jake Gyllenhaal. I, I'm glad that you enjoyed him as well here. But I guess it makes sense that you've got an Oscar nominated movie star of his caliber in the lead, that it would work, right? Like I guess
Hmm.
like if he didn't work in this role, it's like what is he doing wrong? So it's almost like that was the one piece that like worked because it was supposed to work. And then it's like you're right. Like I completely agree about. I want to say probably everything that you were talking about here. I mean, so when we get back to the touches, right? Because and I think some of the issues that I have with this movie, I didn't realize why I had them until you brought up some things about the first movie, and it clicked. So the decision to make the filmmakers in this movie made the decision to have a different band play every night.
Yeah.
Whereas in the first Roadhouse, we got Jeff Healey with his band there, and there's a sense that that they're growing with the changes that are happening in the bar. Whereas in here, we've just got a new group every night, and it felt like they were just like some like millennial hipsters trop rock like playlist, like there was nothing like good about the songs. There was nothing, again and again, in the 1989, I guess maybe for us, as being younger, 89, it's like when we're hearing these songs like all along the Watchtower and things like that, these are like classics to us that like make a lot of sense. And I guess if you're a kid today, if you're born in the mid '90s and you hear a Sublime cover, right? And maybe that's the same thing as a Jimi Hendrix cover. I don't know, but that part. I mean, the comment that I had, and I don't want to be dumping on millennials too much here because I guess I don't know if I was born in 1979, so I don't know if that makes me on the cusp. I guess I don't really belong to any generation, right? I'm not a Gen Xer or millennial, but anyway, but it feels like if you took Roadhouse and you showed it to some people that were born in like the late '80s, early '90s, and you said, "What does this look like to you?" This is the movie that they would make. This is like their version of it. The only thing that was missing was like some muted colors and some, inauspicious fonts, for the millennial aesthetic. But it feels like that's what we got here. And unfortunately, what that means is there was a heart in the first movie. I mean, remember Ben Gazzara when he's listening to the kind of the '80s music, right? Like his
Yeah.
girlfriend is doing aerobics to like '80s music. He's like, I hate this stuff. It doesn't have any heart. I kind of feel like this movie. It's like this movie doesn't have any heart. I guess is maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we were talking about the fact that the people, many of the characters in the original Roadhouse, they're vivid
Yes.
characters, even in the smaller roles. Whereas here in this film, they're completely anonymous. So, is it Jessica Williams as the bar
Yes.
owner? Yeah,
Right.
like I mean, she's not bad, but
Right.
she's completely anonymous.
Right.
And then you have the bookstore owner and his daughter, and like they're meant to be like interesting like bit part characters, but even they're kind of totally bland and anonymous. And so, you've then got the kind of Kathleen Wilhoit surrogate in this film as one of the bar staff. She's kind of, I mean, she's probably better than Jessica Williams and the kind
Yes.
of the bookstore people, but only by comparison. I mean, she's you know she's only slightly better. And so just, yeah, it's just everything is so bland, everything is so anonymous. There just doesn't feel, yeah, there's no heart to this film. There's no life to it. It just feels sort of like corporate, bland corporate professionalism. I mean, it's watchable as a film, but it's not terribly interesting and it's not terribly enjoyable. But I mean, there's a beginning, middle, and end. I'm struggling it, Max.
Yes. Well, so here are some things too that I think about, when you're comparing movies. So the first Roadhouse was a modern western, right? It's,
Yeah.
Dalton as the lone gunslinger comes into town, and Ben Gazzara, the evil landowner, is, whatever. But they don't hit you over the head with the fact that they want this to be a western, right? At no point does, Dalton walk into a room and people will be like, boy, you're just like what Clint Eastwood or something, or
Yeah.
this is, you're like a western, and even like the characters' names are western characters' names, but they're not quite, right? Like I think like
Oh,
Wade
Wade
Garrett, right? Like,
Garrett. I mean,
yeah,
that is pure Western, isn't it?
right.
I mean,
Yeah, and Brad Wesley, I guess, was, so and
yeah.
even Dr. They kept calling Dr. Elizabeth Doc, right? So it's like, okay, so there was some kind of, some elements to westerns, but nobody overtly said it, right? Whereas in this movie, they have to overtly tell us, because I guess I don't know if they think that younger audiences wouldn't pick up on the fact that this is supposed to be working on Western themes. I mean, anytime I watch a Seagal movie and that takes place in Romania and they go to a strip club that's like a dangerous strip club, I'm like, there's the saloon, right? It's like pretty much every action movie is kind of based off the idea of a Western. But the fact that they had to tell us constantly, right? That, like you talk about the store owner and his daughter, right?
Yeah.
The daughter is just constantly telling us, hey, this is a Western. You're in a Western. We're in a
And what
Western.
were they trying to achieve
Right.
by kind of making that so overt?
Right.
That is what is equally as confusing about it. It's like what were they trying to achieve by like hitting us over the head with that? I completely at a loss.
Yeah. And one of the things too, I know, on your site you talk about Chekhov's chopper, right? Chekhov's helicopter. If you see the helicopter, that something's going to happen with it. This movie has a lot of Chekhovs that don't pay off. We've got Chekhov's crocodile, right? And at one point, he eats one of the thugs or henchmen that are giving Jake Gyllenhaal a hard time, right? He eats him, but that's it. We never see that crocodile ever again. I was expecting the crocodile to maybe get, Billy Magnuson's baddie, right? That like he's maybe got like a gun, right? He's ready to shoot him, and then the crocodile comes up and grabs him by the, something like that. It's like you can't introduce a crocodile in the early part of
Mm.
the movie, use it in the middle, and then never use it again, right? Like that crocodile's got to be there somewhere. Like you talked about Laura, who's doing the Catherine Wilhot character played by BK Cannon. I think she, out of all of the people in the film, she may have had the best chemistry with Jake Gyllenhaal. And,
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
and I wonder, so here's an idea with this movie, is that maybe the way that they could have zigged where the other movies act is that instead of him hooking up with Daniela Melchior, maybe he hooks up with BK Cannon's character, right? Maybe that's the person he has a relationship with. That would have been a huge zag. But it's like, well, no, her character, she just to full disclosure, she's overweight. And it's like, well, the overweight character can't get Jake Gyllenhaal. Like that's just
Yeah.
not. We couldn't ever do that. That would be
And she's got
crazy,
glasses as well. So I
right?
mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, just the odds are stacked against it. I mean, yeah, and I completely agree. She definitely has the best chemistry with Jake Gyllenhaal. She actually brings some personality
yeah.
to her performance in a way in which so many of the other actors in this film don't. And they try to bring personality, but they don't establish it. So like Joaquin de Almeida's like corrupt sheriff character is kind of like known as Big Dick, like amongst the
Yes,
kind of like the villains.
right,
But the kind of film, if you're going to have a character who is kind of like colloquially known as Big Dick, you there's a tone that you need to establish,
right.
and you kind of need to, you kind of you need to have a scene where he acts in a way which kind of makes you think, oh yeah, this guy would be known as Big Dick or could believably be called this, but the film never bothers to establish him in that way, never bothers to set him up in that way. And so when people start referring to him as Big Dick, it just falls absolutely like flat on the screen. Just like being like hit across the face with a dead fish. I mean, it's just so bad. I don't know why. It might have been an idea that I don't know why that stuff wasn't cut out, because it's just like, oh God, this is just gruesome to watch.
Well, and then the other thing too is his character is completely neutralized by the fact that Daniela Melchior is his daughter. So there's this scene, right, where he's working for the baddies, right? Big Dick is working for Ben Brandt and the baddies, and his sheriffs arrest Jake, or they bring Jake Gyllenhaal out to like a dock area where they are going to beat him up and then kill him. That's the plan, right? Is that
Mm.
and instead of him having to work his way out of the situation, Daniela Melchior shows up and is like, oh, I'm his daughter, and I'm just gonna take him with me. And he's of course like, well, you're my daughter. I'm not gonna shoot you, so sure, you can take Jake
Yeah.
Gyllenhaal with you. And it just sort of completely just sort of it the main character isn't. I mean, I guess the only thing that you could say that Jake Gyllenhaal, that the only way that he was an agent in his own escape there, or his own solution to that problem, is that he's just so great looking and so charming that Daniela Melchior had to want to be with him. That then he was able to call in that favor without really calling it in, right? She just shows up and saves him. But
Mm.
beyond that, we don't get anything else with Big Dick, right? He shows up at the end to like essentially sort of double cross Jake Gyllenhaal, but Jake Gyllenhaal knew it the whole time. It was so obvious what he was trying to do. And then when he finds out that this Brandt guy has his daughter, suddenly he's no longer friends with this Brandt guy, and that's it. That's all we get from him. He's like this character that's like a concept that, like you said, he doesn't really do anything.
I agree, and there are other concepts with the villains that are just half written and
Yeah.
don't really go anywhere. So the idea is that Billy Magnuson's character Ben Brandt is the son of like some big crime boss who's now been behind bars. And the idea is that Billy Magnuson, as we know, he's got the kind of he's got useless son syndrome, which we've seen in a thousand films. He's out of his depth, really, running the show. He's only got the gig because he's the son of the boss. And so there is this idea that his dad is who calls in Conor McGregor to kind of try and sort out this situation. There's that scene where he doesn't take the phone call from his dad. So there's this idea like, oh, my useless son is fucking up again. But again, we've seen that in lots of films, and you kind of like the various ways that sort of plays out. But the kind of film sort of starts building that as if it's going to kind of do something with it, but then it never actually does. So it's just like, why even bother having this like big boss dad who's off screen? Why even bother having him in the film? Just make Billy Magnuson the villain of the piece if you're not going to kind of actually do anything with that. I mean, it's just yeah. It's just another example of sort of tropes, familiar plot devices that they sort of do something half with, and then they just like run out of like interest or ideas, and they just quietly forget about them.
Yeah, because a good idea might have been, right, that Joaquin de Almeida, he's the baddie, right? He's the head baddie. I mean, we saw him in Fast Five, right? He was great as the head baddie in Fast Five, so we know he could do it. And Conor McGregor as his Marshall Teague, and I don't know if I guess they felt like that would have been too like similar to the first movie. But part of the reason why it worked in the first movie is because it worked, right? Because
Mm,
Joaquin de Almeida, I think he could have chewed the scenery the way that we needed, because he did it in Fast Five, right? I think he would have done it in a different
yeah.
way than Ben Gazzara did it, but he still would have done it. And then I think Conor McGregor, I think you he could have really had. I mean, it would have been his own energy. I mean, the problem with Conor McGregor, I think, and I don't know how you feel about this, I think Marshall Teague is more of an actor.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't Marshall Teague's first role. He'd been in stuff before, but he was like an actor who happened to know martial arts, as opposed to a martial artist with a big name that you could put on the tin and say, "Oh, we've got Conor McGregor in this too." And I think one of the things about that, I think we take for granted that like Conor McGregor is a character in real life, and you just take for granted that he could be a character in a movie. And he kind of isn't. It just because he walks around naked and headbutts people and stuff like that doesn't mean that he's necessarily a character.
I completely agree. I mean, he's awful in this film. He's really bad. In a better film, it would he would be fine. Like if other things were better, I could easily overlook Conor McGregor if other stuff around him. But unfortunately, as we've already discussed, there's just too many. He's just one of a multitude of problems, and yeah, he yeah, oh, every time it's just like watching somebody every time he has a scene where he has to kind of like deliver a sort of villainous line, it's like listening to somebody like drag their fingernails down a chalkboard. I mean, it's just awful.
Right, which for American audience, just the Irish accent alone should be enough to do it. But it's like, I mean, again, if we work on the premise that if we do, Joaquin de Almeida as the head
Big
baddie, and
bad.
Conor, yeah, if Conor McGregor's his Marshall Teague, he doesn't have to do as much, right? Like that was part of the problem, is this movie needed him to do a lot more than for his first, film role. It'd be like, if Don the Dragon Wilson, if they were just, if you're just like, okay, you've got to be, I don't know, Bennett in Commando or something like that, right? Like it wouldn't work, right? Like you'd be like, no, Don the Dragon Wilson's not ready for this kind of a role yet. But they put Conor McGregor in that. So I think, to your point, I think a better movie with more support. I mean, in the first Roadhouse movie, right, Conor McGregor would have been maybe the original bouncer who gets fired or something like that. That
Yeah.
would have been his role, and it would have worked, right? We would have been like, "Oh, this is great. Yeah, we know Conor McGregor, right? He's a." I guess he would have like Terry Funk actually is a great comp because he was a professional wrestler at that time, and he's the original bouncer who gets fired and then ends up joining the baddies, and that kind of thing. But yeah, this movie needed too much women. The thing is, you had actors like Jessica Williams who done more stuff before, but her role is so small that like there isn't really much there for her to do either.
There's nothing for her to do. There is literally nothing for her to do. So that, I mean, that is why, I mean, you could give that part to a more charismatic actor, but I think it would still feel like a nothing role because there is just nothing that she's really got to do in this film, and that is the trouble with too many parts in this film. And there are other elements as well, which I think I mean, I don't know if you picked up on, like, I had a real issue with the dialogue in this film, or like the sound of the dialogue, and I was like, has this film basically been recorded? Has it all been sort of, has the dialogue all been recorded like in post production? Has it all been dubbed in? And like, why on earth would you do that? And I don't know if you are aware of the AI rumors around this film.
Yeah, so I think you're I mean I think what happens is that they cut the scenes really quickly, right? And so because this happens a lot in America when you watch commercials, and I don't know if this is maybe the same thing in the UK, because commercials have such limited time space that like if when you actually watch the commercial, you notice that nobody's actually saying what they're saying, right? That it's like just this clip of somebody about to talk, and then it cuts to like the car or whatever, and really all the conversation is going over the car driving or that kind of thing. And I almost kind of, thinking of directors, I mean, Albert Pyun used to do this kind of thing. And I guess this is just, sort of like, yeah, how you make the movies. You've got these quick edits and these quick cuts, and then the dialogue is done after the fact. I didn't see anything in the trivia that suggested this, but I kind of, I'm thinking maybe it was the same thing.
Well, I mean, when I was watching this film, the first time I was watching, I was completely unaware of of this. So I was just watching the film the first time, completely unaware, and I was like, what's going on with this film? The sound of the dialogue just doesn't sound right, and just things were just, it was just off. I was like, doesn't look like that person is actually saying that line right now. And then I was like looking into it like afterwards, and it turns out that there are rumors that basically the dialogue of this film was completed using like AI voice recording. So they kind of used voice samples of the actors to then like create the dialogue that they're saying in some of these scenes. Now that's all been denied, but I don't know. I was watching, I was watching out for it again, and there is something is going on with the dialogue and the sound in this film, because it's not just in terms of, there's not just terms of kind of like moments where you're seeing somebody's mouth and it just doesn't really feel like the words are coming out of them at that moment. There's also times in this film where characters are talking and you would expect at that moment, you would expect, okay, I would see the face of that actor because of like how long they've been talking. Okay, we need to see their face, but the camera does, we're not on the sort of shot that you expect, and it just feels, and it's like the character is talking, we're just seeing the back of their head and we're seeing somebody else react to it, and it just feels like, well, are they hiding? What are they hiding here? Because are they hiding the fact that actually this is, if we show this shot, it doesn't expose the fact that this has been dubbed in, or we're kind of using an artificially, created voice track here for this for this particular film. And why does that happen? And like, apparently this film was, the production of this film, they were kind of in a bit of a race against time, so they had to finish the like all the work on this film by like November last year, because the rights to the story reverted
Right.
back to the original screenwriters. And then obviously in the last 18 months, we've had both a writer's strike and the actors' strike. And so like putting sort of various things together, you start wondering like, okay, were they basically they were up against the deadline, they'd been hit by the writers' strike, they'd been hit by the actors' strike, and so was the only way to kind of get this film finished, was it to sort of, did they need to take some sort of shortcuts in terms of how this film was cut together, how the dialogue was recorded, etc. So yeah, that's my suspicions as to kind of what I was picking up on, or what I've been picking up on, like in my two viewings of this film now.
Yeah, because actually you're right, because the original screenwriter is suing. I think he's suing Amazon over this, and MGM because he saying that like, yeah, them doing this. That's right. I completely forgot about the AI element of it. I know they, I think they had until so they had until 2022, I guess, to make the movie or start the movie or start production.
Mm,
Um, I think that was the deal. Then they had to get it out, like you said, they had to get it out by this time. That's right, because it would have been what 35 years, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and so and what's interesting, actually, I didn't even consider this. The original movie was supposed to come out in March, but it ended up coming out in May of '89. So I wonder if that even gave them like an extra month or two to work with. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense because and I wonder too, like I wonder if you're if it, from a SAG standpoint, if they're doing this, it's one thing when Godfrey Ho is not making a
Mm.
SAG movie, and he's like, "Here, Richard Harrison, yeah, we're only doing two ninja movies." Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and suddenly Richard Harrison looks and there's in 20 ninja movies, right? It's like that's what you get for not doing a SAG movie, but this is a SAG movie, and I think if that comes, if there's ever a lawsuit, right? If this lawsuit, that the original writer, if this lawsuit actually goes to court and there's depositions taken, people might have to testify under oath, about what happened here, which might encourage Amazon to settle out of court if this is what they did, which means we would never really know the truth until there's some sort of tell-all or
Yeah.
oral history of the making of it. But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the other piece, right, is the CGI element. Where they're using the CGI technique where the characters actually punch, I think, punching bags,
Yeah.
and then they're like kind of threaded in. The image of them is threaded into the fight scenes where they're missing the punches. And there was a part of me that was like, okay, I'm not a fan of that. But then when I heard about what Patrick Swayze went through to make the first movie, it's like, okay, if this keeps the actors safer, maybe I'm a little bit on board. But I don't know how you felt. I mean, it looked off, I will say.
I agree. I like it looks off, and the kind of it creates a sort of jerkiness in the fight scenes that takes you out of the movie. Now, like I was reading something about how those fight scenes were put together, and like I'm not against that sort of people employing that sort of method, because like you can see the logic for it, because the idea is that you're able to actually create something that looks more realistic. Unfortunately, I think what the trouble here is, it comes down to the execution, and the execution is not good enough to sort of make you believe the moment. And maybe somebody will come along in the future and use these techniques in order to put together a better fight sequence. I'm probably sure that probably will happen at the moment. But yeah, like sort of Doug Liman's ideas for sort of what he wanted to achieve with the fight sequences, I sadly just don't work. They just have this slightly jerky quality, which just yeah, just pulls you out of the movie. And it looks a very time. It looks. I mean, as I say, from reading the articles, it looks it must have been very painstaking, very time-intensive labor into kind of shooting fight sequences in this particular way. And yeah, regrettably, it doesn't look like all of that time and effort really paid dividends, or not for me, at any rate.
No, because yes, Patrick Swayze broke ribs and injured his knee, and had to do Ghost and couldn't do Predator 2 because of what happens in the Roadhouse. But the fight scenes looked better. I mean, that fight scene, there's nothing, the end fight between Jake Gyllenhaal and Conor McGregor is supposed to be pretty epic, right? It's supposed to look, and I did like the end of the fight scene, but overall, right, because of the way it's shot, it didn't quite have the I don't know. It didn't. There's something about the one in Roadhouse between Marshall Teague and Patrick Swayze that just I don't want to say it's iconic. I don't know if that's the right term I want to use for it, but it works on a different level that this one that was supposed to be great, and maybe part of it is again that Conor McGregor is just not Marshall Teague enough, and for whatever and I don't know, but I
Well, I
think part
tell
of
you
it,
what I think. I
yeah,
think it comes down to emotion,
yeah,
and you've if you create characters that you care about, that you are invested in, then they can have a fight scene, and you will care about the outcome of it, even if the sort of the choreography of it isn't like the very best fight scene that has ever taken place. And yeah, I really enjoy that showdown between Marshall Teague and Patrick Swayze in the original Roadhouse. Is that the best choreographed martial arts fight of all time? Absolutely not. But by this point in the movie, you really like Patrick Swayze's character. By this point in the film, you really want to see Marshall T get his comeuppance. So,
right,
like, and the fight scene is well enough staged that you can enjoy it for every moment that it takes place. And I think that's what is a huge problem in the kind of the end scene here, because between like Gyllenhaal and McGregor, is because you're not really that fussed about anything that's happening in the movie. So if there are issues with the choreography, well, then that's just going to exacerbate those issues. It just becomes, I hate there's some martial arts films, that I can appreciate them from a technical standpoint, but I don't feel anything. I can appreciate the skill of, the performers, the stunt, the choreography and the stunt things. But like, if I don't care about what the hero is trying to achieve, if I don't care that the villain, gets his comeuppance, then I'm not really going to feel anything. And I want to feel something. I don't, when I watch a film, I can enjoy a film on an intellectual level, but I also want to feel something. And you know, with this Roadhouse remake, I feel absolutely, well, I do feel something, and it's tedium.
right, right. Well, one of the things I think too, we're talking about remakes, right? And you're saying how, the Maltese Falcon, right, had been remade multiple times, before this one here. The fact that they decided to make a Roadhouse remake where Jake Gyllenhaal's character is not a famous bouncer, I was trying, you're using the Maltese Falcon as an example. It would be like if Humphrey Bogart, Sam Spade wasn't a private detective, right? But he was, I don't know what job you'd give him, right? Something that's private detective adjacent, I guess. So like, I don't know, like an insurance adjuster, or something. I don't know what it would, what the character would be, but
Bounty hunter. I mean,
about right. But like if somebody today made a Maltese Falcon where Sam Spade was a bounty hunter, you'd be kind of like, I mean, the whole point of the movie is that he's a detective, right? Sam Spade, detective. Like that's
mm.
we almost in a way we even use that expression as a way to oh, he's a regular Sam Spade, right? Like that's and I mean, I guess I don't know if people refer to bouncers as Daltons, the same way that they refer to detectives as Sam Spades. But that was the whole point of the movie, is that he's a famous bouncer. And to do away with that part, for me, it made me feel like, what's the point? I don't know what your thought was on that.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't have a particularly strong view on that. I just think make a better movie, and if
Yeah.
I think they could have made a better movie where he was a famous bouncer, like in the original, and I think they could have made a better movie where he's a famous UFC fighter. I just think just make a better movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, if you've got Jake Gyllenhaal, like if you've been able to get him in the movie, I mean, one of the things that I think, at least in his case, he shows up here and does what you want Jake Gyllenhaal to do. I feel like if you get an actor of that quality, you've got to put everything around him to make it great. Otherwise, it's just like a direct-to-video movie with Mel Gibson because he can't get a regular part, and you're just like watching him act. I mean, that's essentially kind of what you get here. And I liked Jake Gyllenhaal here. That's the thing. I wasn't I wasn't sure if I would or not, but I did, which made it kind of all the more frustrating that it was like he didn't get a movie that was worthy of the performance.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I just it's I think he actually plays it with the right sort of tone to actually make this thing work, because it is such a such a daft premise for a film that you kind of need, you need to hit the right tone, and you need sort of everybody to be on the same page, which they are in the original, but unfortunately it just doesn't, yeah, you don't, you know, Lyman, either through casting or through the direction that he was giving to these other actors, he just wasn't able to kind of sort of get everybody else on the same page and kind of create that sort of world build in a way which then, okay, yep, I'm on board for suspending my disbelief for 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a great comp to this might be Prey, the 2022 Predator, film, where, you know, we and of course there have been multiple Predators in between. So there have been other movies that were made in between, but it was like they kind of got what made Predator good. They got that aspect, and then the new elements that they added in, they kind of were threaded in a way that worked organically, that you felt like you had an organic. I don't. It's not really like a reboot of the Predator. It's like kind of, it's like a prequel of it, but at least it's the idea that like a modern Predator movie, they kind of got what made that first Predator good, and they worked with that. Whereas this movie, it's almost like they didn't get what made Roadhouse good. Um, which is unfortunate, because it's like you could have asked any of us and we would have told you what made Roadhouse good. So it's like they just didn't get that part.
Yeah, and it does. It's sort of strange. You sort of, okay, where did this go? Where did this go wrong? Like, who wanted to make this film? Like, I mean, I've not looked into the motivations of this film. Like, was this a passion project for Jake Gyllenhaal? Was this a project for Doug Liman? You know, did Doug Liman just get brought in as a gun for hire, or like, yeah, I mean, I don't know where, yeah, I don't know whose idea this was, and who was really, it doesn't really feel like anyone was really like carrying the torch for this movie. If anyone, it's maybe Jake Gyllenhaal, but I mean, we know people were looking at making this film with Ronda Rousey before, so it doesn't feel like something he's been trying to make for 10 years or anything. So yeah, I'd yeah,
Well, I was gonna say the other thing. So
intrigued.
Doug Lyman thought this was going to be released theatrically. That's what he says he was told. Now
Mm,
Jake Gyllenhaal says no. This was always meant to go straight to Prime, or straight to streaming. But Lyman said, and so that's why he actually, I guess, like checked. Like he didn't even go to the premiere, and he didn't do any of the kind of the publicity around it. He didn't really support this movie because he was angry that it wasn't put in the theater. Again, Jake Gyllenhaal disputes that, says, hey, Doug Lyman, of course, he's very passionate about his movie and defends his movie, but this was always meant to go straight to streaming. So I don't know, with that idea there, but I think going back to your point about them needing to make a movie because they were going to lose the rights at some point, that the rights were going to revert back to the original screenwriter, maybe explains it better, right? That like, okay, let's just throw in a bunch of pieces that we think are going to work here.
yeah.
And, and again, I would be curious to know if younger people would appreciate this movie because it's got, people they recognize, like Conor McGregor, or, obviously Jake Gyllenhaal, but some of these other actors. I mean, I don't really know Billy Magnuson, but I think he's done, he's done some stuff that, that people see. I mean, the character, Lucas Gage, who plays Billy, the sort of the bouncer that was there before, that he kind of, that Jake Gyllenhaal supposedly takes under his wing, but really doesn't do anything to take under his wing. It's just suddenly he's just better at being a bouncer. I mean, he looks like a kid they grabbed off of TikTok. And same with the other bouncer that he gets, who was like a boxer or whatever. It's like they just went on TikTok and said, "Oh, hey, you're doing this reel here on TikTok," or whatever it is that they call those things. Hey, why don't you be in a movie? And I don't know if like younger people would look at that and be like, yeah, he looks like, Jake Paul or something like that from TikTok videos. This is great. I want to see more of this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, what were the motivations behind making this film? Because like, the original Roadhouse, it's a bit of a, it's a cult film, at best. It doesn't really feel like, why this? I mean, I think sometimes films get remade just because, you know what, we can, it's like we'll buy the rights to that film that existed before, and that in some ways it like inoculates you against any kind of like copyright sort of issues. If you're like, yeah, we're going to remake Roadhouse, so it's like, okay, well, you know, you're not going to get sued by somebody else because they're saying, well, you've stolen my idea, because we're remaking somebody else's idea, and like whatever. And it doesn't, you know, it's a cult film, so it doesn't really feel like there was like, what was the, you know, was there a huge untapped, like, you know, Roadhouse nostalgia market that they were hoping to cash in on? I don't doesn't Never really felt to me like, you know, there was a sort of great sort of silent army of people out there waiting to part with their cash to watch this movie. It just, yeah, just the whole thing just strikes me. And then, as I say, there doesn't seem to be anybody who is really like leading the charge in terms of like, yeah, this is the film I really wanted to make. So it just feels like, okay, why does this film exist? Like,
Yeah, okay.
other than we've got these expiring rights and we could maybe wring some money out of this before we, yeah, before we lose the rights to it. I wonder if that was just the predominant kind of driving force behind this film.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if they thought maybe they could start a franchise, based off this. I mean, I think you're right about the idea that like a cult classic like Roadhouse, like why are you I mean, this movie. I mean, if this movie wasn't called Roadhouse, right? If it was just Jake Gyllenhaal in a you know playing a disgraced UFC fighter who becomes a bouncer, and they didn't use any of the kind of like the in jokes for Roadhouse, or some of those things, but it was just its own kind of movie. Obviously it still wouldn't have been a good movie, right? Like you still, we would have looked at this and had the
Mm,
same issues that we have with it. Those issues would still exist, right? All the pieces of things, or the seeds of things that never fully germinated that we get throughout the movie. The look of it would still be the look of it. The actors and the bad chemistry would still be the actors and the bad chemistry. But it's almost like you said, like the fact that they slapped Roadhouse on it. I mean, I don't know who was watching this. Like, if it's somebody who was born in the 70s, grew up
yeah.
in the 80s with Roadhouse and loved it as kind of the way we did, right? Like, if we, you know, there's not really much in here for us, right? I mean,
Well, you know what I was thinking? That is, why didn't they get Sam Elliott in as like the person who owns the bookstore?
yeah,
Like, why didn't they? Why not have Kathleen Wilhoit as she now owns she now owns the bar. It's like
right.
she runs the bar. She's looking for a bouncer. Why? I mean, that's such a kind of common trope. Is like, we've seen it a million times in these films. You kind of get some of the actors from the original film in to kind of play parts in the new film. I mean, why not do that? I would that would definitely have been like, however bad it would, I probably would have it would have been a tick in the plus column for me.
Right, exactly. Well, and I mean, just the idea of a modern take on Roadhouse. I mean, part of the reason why we love Roadhouse is that it's not modern, right? I mean, part of the reason why Roadhouse has sort of done well over time is that you go back and you see like the girlfriend and the workout gear, the very 80s workout gear, listening to the very 80s song, and Ben Gazzara saying, it says no heart, those are things that are just such 80s element. I mean, Patrick Swayze's hair, right? I mean, they were joking like, who used more hairspray, Patrick Swayze or Kelly Lynch? There's no hairspray joke in this movie, right? Like, because there's nobody using hairspray, like nobody, there's none of those kinds of kind of fun nostalgia elements either. So it's like, okay, why do we need a modern version of Roadhouse? Okay, well, maybe they think that maybe there's enough of an ironic younger audience for Roadhouse that they think this will capture for them. That like, I know that there's kind of a thing amongst younger people that they like, what they would consider vintage stuff that we would just consider stuff that we grew up with, but like they kind of like it in an ironic way. I mean, the whole soft rock music thing, right? The whole yacht rock thing, like that's
Mm.
another example of that, where you get these kids who were born in like the late 80s, early 90s, who go to concerts wearing a Captain and Tennille, captain's hat, and listen to cover bands do versions of Africa by Toto and stuff like that. Like I wonder if they felt like you could get that's the audience that they were looking for, and that they want this movie, maybe, and maybe we're not the audience for it.
Well, I mean, given how this film has gone down, then they didn't make something that worked for that audience, and
Right.
certainly didn't make anything that worked for us. So
No, no,
sounds
no.
like a disaster.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, as we're wrapping up here, anything else on this movie that we didn't cover?
Um, I mean, I think I would just say that you know one thing they did again, going back to this thing about talking about taking care of the small details, like in the original Roadhouse, there are reasons why fights break out in the Double Deuce, whereas in the remake film, like there are all these people, like huge numbers of people in this bar, and all hell breaks loose for no apparent reason. And as we were saying before, I'd never get my girlfriend to go to this bar. Like so why are there people there? And it's fine. And some of the best scenes in the original film are like kind of giving you the reasons why these fights break out. So we get in we get in the original Roadhouse, we get that sort of great scene where there's that guy. He's kind of like, oh, you can kiss my wife's breasts for $20 or something, and what? This guy's like delighted by the prospect of this, and he's groping his wife, and the guy, oh, why don't you kiss them? And he's like, well, I haven't got $20, and then like he's appalled that he's not going to get it, and that create, which I mean, it's really crass, but it's very amusing, and it kind of gives a reason for the all hell to break loose in the bar, and it's just the kind of, as I say, it's just it's just a great little moment, create, and then which amusing scene in itself, and then creates the kind of the bar brawl that then sort of needs to happen. And it's just there's nothing like that in this film, and it's just, as I say, it's just like taking care of the little details, and then the big picture takes care of itself. And say another example of how this film just misses out on I think for such a dumb film, the original Roadhouse is actually quite a bit smarter than you might sort of initially think on a first viewing, in the sense of to pull off something like that original Roadhouse actually takes quite a bit of work, quite a bit of skill from everybody involved.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, right? So it's funny. I'm part of this like sort of this writers group here in Philadelphia where we share writing and critique it and stuff like that. And this one guy was doing like a kind of a play on romantic comedies, right? And he wanted to do like kind of some sort of meta criticism or something on romantic comedies. And I don't think he realized that, right? Like that. To do a sort of a romantic comedy itself is like like 100 pages of script, but to do it in a novel form would take hundreds of that like over 100,000 words, and it would be like you really have to kind of dig in and get in on that. But like it's almost like like almost like the meta criticism or joke or whatever on the movie, it actually takes a lot more than you think when you dig in, right? Like I think Roadhouse would not be the cult classic it is. It would probably be more along the lines of like a Miami Connection, right, or a Samurai Cop.
Mm.
And even that, like I don't think those movies are as easy to make remakes of as people think they are. Because like you said, there's like that lightning in a bottle element, whether it's good or bad. Um, but you're right, like that this Roadhouse, the Roadhouse that we, the original one, there aren't a lot of these sort of these germinated seeds that don't pay off at the end of the movie, right? There is no Chekhov's crocodile in Roadhouse. In fact, we don't get any kind of crocodile or anything like that. But you get the sense that the writers and the director and stuff would say, like, okay, if we've got a crocodile mentioned in the first act and we use the crocodile in the second act, the crocodile has to play some kind of part in the final act. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels here. Like, you feel like there would have been an attention to detail there with that first movie that this movie doesn't have.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I can only agree, Matt.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I guess as we're wrapping up here. So I feel like I was hoping that we would come in here and be like, hey, this actually wasn't so bad. But I think we both knew going in what this was going to be. But I think it's good to put it in the context of the first movie and why that first movie works, and that you can't just remake a movie and even like Maltese Falcon, right? I mean, there's more going on in Maltese Falcon than just swapping in Humphrey Bogart for the lead, right? They do more there to make that a classic, and maybe Doug Liman should have watched the Maltese Falcon for inspiration when he was making this movie. That maybe that should have been his inspiration as opposed to the actual Roadhouse movie.
Well, my only worry about getting Doug Liman to watch The Maltese Falcon would be that he starts thinking that he can remake it and better.
Right. Yes. Can you imagine if he gets a whole bunch of voice samples of Bogart and just like
Oh,
AIs in Bogart's voice? That's the fear we have about AI, right? Is that that's what's going to happen? Is that somebody's going to make a new Bogart movie with AI, and we're all just going to just, if
yeah.
that
I mean,
ever happens, I'm not
Bogart's voice is probably out of copyright now, so it's
right.
probably it's a free for all out there now.
Yes, exactly. So it's all going to hell. And so with that beautiful note to leave things on, Will, anything that you'd like to plug?
Yes, well, before we all go to hell and crisp ourselves to a toast, make sure you check out the Exploding Helicopter website, which is explodinghelicopter.com, for reviews of films where helicopters explode. You can also check out our podcast, where you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. And Matt has done me the good service of coming on more than a few episodes of that. And yeah, don't forget to check us out on social media. We are on Twitter at Chopperfireball, also on Instagram and Facebook. So if you type in Exploding Helicopter, I'm sure you'll find us.
Yeah, all great content. And I think one of the things with the Exploding Helicopter podcast, when it comes to the movies you watch, yes, some of the movies don't fully, work the way that you want them to. But I mean, I think of a movie like Soldier Boys that we covered on your podcast, and granted, it had it had Aronofsky, as like the second unit director, but for as crazy as that universe was, it felt like there was more like the kind of like was consistent through that than this Roadhouse movie that we watched.
Well, I believed the world of Soldier Boys, where you could just take a group of kids out of a young offenders institution and take them over to Vietnam for an unsanctioned military operation. I believed in the circumstances of that movie more than I believed in the circumstances of Jake Gyllenhaal's Roadhouse.
That might be the best commentary on this movie, right? It's not comparing it to the first. We should have done Soldier Boys Roadhouse is what we should have done for the two, right? Yeah, exactly. But
I would have been here for it, Matt.
Right, it would have been an interesting. People would have gotten an interesting take on that for sure. But I'm glad we got to see the first Roadhouse, because I think that movie. I think when you get these kinds of remakes, I think it's always good to kind of remind ourselves why that first movie worked so well. And I think we, going over a lot of the things in that, it also kind of informed why the first this new one didn't land as well. That I could go back to that first one and be like, oh, here's where they did it right. And it is interesting that you had all those moments where they did it right, and they just didn't quite, manage those moments in this new one.
Yeah, it was as I said earlier, I hadn't watched the original for a long time, so it was a real pleasure to go back and refresh my memory of that film.
Yeah, I think sometimes we just need to go back to those and remind ourselves why we like them so much, for sure. But thank you again, Will, for coming on. This was a great time.
Always a pleasure, Matt. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.
Direct to video.